Hi, my name's Craig Wilson, and welcome to a new episode of the Making the Media podcast. Thanks a lot for taking the time to join us. Generative AI has been a field where there's been rapid development over the past 18 months, and that development is raising many questions for newsrooms around the world. While AI remains an exciting area which many journalists are keen to take advantage of to assist their storytelling, there remains significant anxiety about the use of AI in news. The European Broadcasting Union, the EBU for short, has been looking into this area and has produced a report which seeks out the views of industry leaders and also investigates how newsrooms are using this type of technology today. Alexandra Borchardt is the author of the report called Leading Newsrooms in the Age of Generative AI. A senior journalist and recognised industry leader herself with more than 25 years' experience, this report follows on from the EBU report last year, Trusted Journalism in the Age of Generative AI, which she also authored. So I began by asking her about the methodology for the report itself.
This year, I interviewed about 20 media leaders and experts, media leaders who are actually at the forefront of pushing AI in their organizations and who have really very experienced and have lots of insights about, for example, how the uptake is of staff, the editors and journalists of AI in their organizations, also about how audiences react. All these questions were really central to this report because we didn't really have too many insights last year about, for example, audience perception of AI. These reports are qualitative reports, so we entirely rely on interviews with current experienced leaders and, of course, on the latest research that's been published on AI and journalism.
And I think we'll dive into all of the things that you've talked a little bit about there. But one of the very first comments that's made in the report is actually about the rapid pace of development in particularly generative AI, over the past year. But did you find that that's been matched in how newsrooms are actually using the technology, even although it's developing so rapidly?
In fact, what I found was a striking mismatch between the speed of technology development on the one hand, what happens in Silicon Valley and this whole ecosystem, because there's a lot of pressure, also investor pressure about throwing out new tech every minute, it seems, and the speed of development in newsrooms. And there is a reason for this. In fact, when I started doing the research, I was like, oh, lots of things must have happened in a year. And in the beginning, I was almost disappointed that not that much, on the surface at least, has happened. Well, the reason is that there are still really significant problems, for example, with accuracy. And as you know, accuracy is just a part of journalism. It's in the very definition of journalism that it has to be fact-based and accurate. And if there are accuracy problems, well, that's a problem. So newsrooms are navigating around that. Nevertheless, they've spent a lot of work and time on developing AI-based solutions. On the one hand, to increase efficiency in newsrooms, and on the other hand, to enhance creativity and also to reach audiences better. So there are lots of interesting examples, but you have to dig a little bit deeper because on the surface, it's not that sort of hype and huge excitement that we saw when we did research for last year's report.
Is it fair to say that that sense of caution is actually something that's reflected within the journalistic community, but also within, if you like, the technical community that works alongside the journalists as well? Because these are solutions that do require sort of technical development by the organizations. It's not just a case of taking something from ChatGPT and, oh, look, it works. It is about implementing these technologies. So is that caution both on the editorial side and on the technical side, do you think?
Well, let me remind you, we are talking about generative AI here. Generative AI is different from the AI we had before, because generative AI is a predictive technology. So it's not optimized for facts, it's optimized for sounding really nice and having it like a perfect sounding product, but not perfect in terms of fact-based. So there is a lot of effort being put into developing solutions that are not only customized, but also optimized for facts, but that takes time. So that is really something that happens a lot in media organizations. So implementation takes time, and it also is expensive. And in the beginning, there was so much excitement, and everyone was just interested in experimenting and getting people into the spirit and the mood of experimenting. But now people feel, there's also cost involved. And one interview partner, Ann Lagercrantz, the director general of Swedish television, she said, like, well, yeah, AI is making us more creative, but it's not saving us costs yet. It's actually making things more expensive. And of course, there's the hope that this will save cost in the end, but currently everyone is still figuring out what's actually the return on investment on this, and the industry is only slowly getting behind that question. And this said, actually, not even in the tech companies, there is a clear sense of where this is all headed, what the future business models are, how this is going to develop. So that's one of the big questions, how will we actually make money with this, and how will the tech industry make money with this? And in particular, how will the media industry, making money with this, or how will they even survive and really remain visible in this new technological environment where, for example, generative search puts up just summaries and doesn't really lead people to media brands, which is a big challenge.
Yeah, without a doubt, it certainly is. It's part of the challenge at the moment that news organizations, whether you're public or private, they're still actually trying to figure out a strategy around AI because, and I think we'll talk a little bit about this later on, but AI has so many different aspects to it that what they're still trying to figure out is, from a strategic perspective, what are we actually going to do with AI within an organization and how does it benefit us?
Yeah, and I mean, strategy is really core, and there are discussions in news organizations. Do we actually need a special AI strategy, or do we actually need AI to feed into our overall strategy? And my feeling is that actually the second approach makes a lot more sense, because what you really need to have is for example, a journalism strategy. You really need to know what your mission is, what your vision is, and who your audiences are, who the audiences are you want to serve. And then you really have to figure out how you can use AI to achieve these goals better, and just not use AI for AI's sake because it's just a cool new technology and we'll be swept up in it anyway. But just really remaining very clear about the purpose and the strategic goal. And every news organization is at a different place there. So every news organization has to find their own strategic approach to using AI.
Are there also differences in the size of the organization? I mean, I remember this is something that, I spoke with Felix Simon a few years ago about the digital divide between, rich countries and poor countries, and also within small news organizations and larger news organizations. Is there concern about how that might play out?
Well, I mean, there are the big ones on the one hand, and yeah, there might be some sort of winner takes all effect, which we've seen in recent years, like, with players like the New York Times moving ahead. Then there are the big public service media companies that are a little bit more constrained, but still have capacities, for example, to build their own GPTs, to throw lots of people into this, into development, to really develop interesting use cases. And then you have small news organizations, also particularly in the global south, and actually they can benefit a lot from using AI, because when you just have a few people, I mean, AI sort of gives you a lot more power to really produce more, to do more, which is also a risk, of course, because if you don't figure out what you actually want to produce, then it won't lead you anywhere. But really, small organizations have really opportunities with this. Also, for example, they don't really need designers any longer, or all kinds of tech experts, because generative AI enables them to do lots of stuff on their own with very, very few men and women power as an input. On the other hand, small news organizations have a different challenge, because they very often depend on search traffic, for example, and on referrals from social media. And experts pretty much agree, and I just came back from the World News Media Congress in Krakow. Experts pretty much agree that search will really change radically, and it's really now time for everyone to invest in building stable and loyal relationships, direct relationships with their customers, with their users, because this world of search will look completely different 2 to 3 years from now. So you better really get your hands on your customers and build up direct connections. And that is particularly vital for small organizations because they might lose lots of traffic coming from social media and the web.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about audiences, because I think one of the things that, again, is highlighted in the report is that perhaps people forget the purpose of what they're actually doing, because ultimately the purpose is to have an audience. Whether you are a public service broadcaster who's interested in reach, or you're a commercial organization who's interested in eyeballs that are driving towards commercial opportunities. So with the use of AI, is there a danger, if you like, that in the drive to utilize AI or throw the AI at it, as someone famously once said to me, that they actually forget that what we're here to do is to deliver great journalism and to build audiences?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I wouldn't focus on the dangers. I would focus on the hopes, and there are significant hopes in the industry that AI will really help to enhance journalism. Because, for example, with liquid content, that's the technical term. This means that you can actually have, for example, a text, and then easily the AI can transfer it into a video or audio, or transcribe it, or so that you can use actually broader audiences, because everyone can sort of choose the way they want to consume news at, and you can personalize news much better. You can, for example, produce a version for that's tailored for 15-year-olds who are not really knowledgeable, and you can tailor it for this pro who's used to reading long newspaper stories, and you just use the same kind of information and pour it into these different formats. This said, actually, one of my interview partners, which was Laura Ellis from BBC Research Forecasting, she said the danger is that you even more lose touch with your audiences, that no one in your newsroom really understands audiences any longer. Because they don't really have the access to them. No one can speak the voice of particular communities. So, I mean, we've been struggling with this anyway as journalists, to really meet different communities at eye level. And when we just use AI in the future to reach out to different communities and different audiences, we might lose touch in general, and that is a real risk. Also, I find that when I am at industry conferences and the excitement about AI is really overwhelming, one of the major challenges for journalism is actually the journalism itself. The industry produces a lot of stuff that no one consumes. A lot of stuff is produced for the bin because people just feel overwhelmed. There's just too much. There's not enough effort being put into the single stories, into the storytelling, into the relevance. So really, if we just, as an industry, take AI to produce even more in even more formats, then we might really lose touch with audiences' needs, who actually very often demand less. And yeah, some successful digital only outlets, brands like, for example, Zetland in Denmark, they show that really a deeper journalism where you actually produce less but better and in a different voice really resonates with audiences, and you might be much more successful with that. So you better be very careful about just pushing for more volume, but really we need to talk about journalism more. What is quality journalism? What does our audience want as quality journalism? And really go for that.
I think there's two slightly different aspects of that. I think one is around the challenge of journalism for even things like the creator economy and what that means. I think that's maybe a conversation for another day. But I do want to ask you about the point that you made at the end, because for me, those who succeed with AI will be those who use AI to enhance their journalism. So I completely agree with you about embracing what it can potentially offer. But in my view, it should be a spur to journalistic excellence. That's what's going to set apart the mush that people create because there's so much of it, and actually what is of value to people. Is that a fair assessment of the way that AI can be utilized to really benefit audiences?
Yeah, actually, this is one of the most exciting questions from my perspective. Will AI make us more creative or will it make us less creative? And my first response to that would be actually, if you want it to make you more creative, if you really want to go for it, it has tons of ways to make you more creative. It can help you brainstorm. It can help you come up with different ideas for stories. We have 9 use cases in the report. I think I mentioned that. And one is, for example, the story angle generator that the Swiss broadcaster RTS uses. Like on day 2 of a breaking news situation, that the AI gives you some ideas what kind of aspects, angles could be interesting for the story. So it can really enhance creativity. Also, individual journalists are using it and they're being very creative with it. For example, taking a text story and then doing voiceovers and bringing it to life with voiceovers and video and whatever. So if you want to, you can be more creative. But if you just want to offload work, if you just want to press a button and get rid of it, this is also possible. And I recently read an article in the FT that the headline was something like, have we reached peak brain capacity? And that is really a big question. Will we just use AI to offload our work? The good news is, and I interviewed the MIT professor Patty Mice for the report, and she says actually we have this in our hands because we can design these systems in a way that they make us more creative. And they ran experiments on this, and their experience is if the AI just sort of ask one more question that makes people reflect and think and not just encourages them to just press a button, then people are more creative. But this is not a given. We have to want to design these systems in a way that make us more creative. And as individual creators, we need to want to be more creative and use AI for it.
One of the things that comes out in the report is some organizations potentially concerned about hidden use of AI within their organizations. So they may well have tools that they sort of officially prescribe and want people to use, but perhaps somebody, earlier in the process used some AI technology and to then, uncover and begin to move things down. So is that part of the work, is to look at things which are not officially sanctioned and potentially the impact that has?
Yeah, that's super interesting because actually that was my initial assumption when I approached the second report, because last year it was all about getting people to experiment and do things. And the leading question for me in this time around was, how do newsrooms actually bring people along? And I have 30 years of experience in newsrooms, and my experience also as in a leadership role is really that you have these digital divides. You have people who are, resisting this, who don't want to do this. But interestingly, in my research, this really hasn't come up that much. Obviously, there are always pockets of resistance, but the broad majority of people sort of likes to know more and likes to use AI and likes to embrace it. And then actually some of my interview partners said, actually a lot more worried about these AI, like these people who just use AI because they like to try it out and they don't really know what they're doing, and then they are sort of leaking data where it shouldn't be leaked, and so they are not really AI literate, but are very like to explore, which is in a way is a good thing, because one interview partner, Peter Archer of the BBC, also said like, I'd much rather have people who like to explore than people who don't want to play around with this at all. But they should know what they are doing, and that is really like a big demand here to really ramp up AI literacy in newsrooms, because people need to understand what these models are about, what the data protection situation is, what kind of data they can use. Some organizations have created closed systems, sort of playgrounds that help people to experiment without really feeling bad about it. But one of my interview partners, Jiri Kivimeki from Wiley, he also said it's really a design challenge. How do you create the systems? Do you make it really easy so that people just have to press buttons? Or do you make it a bit challenging? Because if you make it too easy, people won't understand what's going on, behind the curtain. And then we're actually doing the same thing that we accuse the tech companies to do. We are producing these black boxes, and people don't really have AI literacy. So really finding a way around that and making it so that people, it makes their work easier, but it still helps them to understand what's happening with AI. This is really important, particularly because we have these huge accuracy problems that research has been surfacing all along, that we can't really assume that what we get there is correct. And if people don't understand that, we'll be in trouble as a media industry, because we need to produce reliable information and trusted information.
Returning to what we talked about with audiences earlier on, and I wanted to ask a little bit actually about public perception of what AI is, and whether there's a sense that newsrooms are doing enough, not to explain about the use of AI in journalism, but to explain about AI in general in society. Is there a feeling within their organizations that they have a story to tell which is about AI, which is actually nothing to do with the AI that journalists might use, but is all about the use of AI in society? Are they getting that right?
Well, Craig, I don't know about your experiences. I think we need much better AI coverage. Actually, we need much better coverage about what intelligence really is, what human intelligence is, how humans work, how they react, and how they can work together with AI. And also we need to investigate, or journalists need to investigate AI more. And one of my interview partners also said that we need to do a lot more investigative research, follow the data. It used to be this thing in journalism, follow the money and then you'll have a great story. Follow the data, because it's really important to see how these systems will shape the way humans behave, the way humans get treated by institutions. For example, when algorithms select you for a bank loan, they select you for a job, when they're used to do all these things where it's really about your future and your personal life, and there needs to be a lot more investigation being done. The tricky thing around this is when you do lots of AI reporting and you have this sort of critical, maybe even negative view on how AI is influencing everything we are doing, that in turn will also influence your audiences. And when then you as a news organization say, oh, actually we're using AI to do these summaries, and we're using AI to produce this text and whatever, and then the audiences, the people remember, oh, I just read this story about how this is really bad for democracy. Then they're like, oh, gee, my trusted news brand, they're using AI. This is not good news. So there's actually a fine line between, actually, it's not a fine line. It's more like you have to sort of be aware what the AI coverage is in the news part of your organization, and then how you approach AI and being transparent about your use of AI. And that will really be a challenging question in the future, as much more audiences take up AI in their personal lives, in their private lives, and really so in the way they take up that use. That will also shape their perception of, what they think media organizations should and should not do when using AI.
I think transparency is the big thing, as you mentioned there. Transparency is also, to my view, allied to trust. And obviously, from a news organization, trust is so important. But within the report, and you've talked a little bit about it there, it is about how transparent are you? Because that can actually have a negative impact on how people's view of what you're actually doing. And I think, I can't remember exactly which contributor it is, but one of them likened it to, if we're using AI in the way we would use a Google search today, we're not going to say to somebody, yeah, I've done a Google search and I've found something and ally that into a story. But if you are using AI for more in-depth work, that perhaps you are using it to generate summaries or to create or to have an artificial voice, that is labeled. And I think there was a DPP report fairly recently which talked about transparency washing, and actually where some organizations that claim to be transparent aren't. Others who are being transparent are actually being penalized in some ways because of that. So it's a really difficult line for them to tread.
Absolutely. And we could probably talk about this for a while, because fact is that maximum transparency doesn't necessarily enhance maximum trust. And I like to give that example. I think I wrote it also in the previous report. If you walk into a hospital, and then in the beginning at the reception desk, you would see a list of all the mistakes that were being made, in the past, whatever, 10 days by any kind of people in the hospital, by doctors or medical personnel, medical staff. You would probably not be very confident about that hospital. Sometimes too much transparency actually diminishes trust. And I really like the work of Rachel Boatsman, what she does on trust. Trust is a shortcut. So trust is actually that you don't need to read up all these manuals on how people work. You just trust your news organization to do everything in their power to be accurate, to produce quality journalism, and to have the right controls and mechanisms in place, checks to not make too many mistakes. So the trust is actually the shortcut between you, the user, and the news organization. And if users read all these long lists about, we're using AI here and there, then they might think, oh, gee, is there anything wrong with it? Can't I trust them? Will they shed responsibility? And this is really interesting. One of my interview partners, this was also Yuri Kivimeki of Wiley, he said they started to label lots of things, and then the users got really angry and they just said, look, just do your job. We don't care what you use for it. We trust you. We want to trust you that you use it in a way that you find responsible. So that is really interesting about the trust debate. Trust is not necessarily being 100% transparent.
Moving away from some of the practical things, one thing that also is surfaced in the report is concerns about copyright and the use of material to train AI models. So I just wanted to ask, what were the views that were being expressed by news organizations about that?
Well, there are a lot of worries, of course. And actually, we dealt with this much more in last year's report, and things haven't changed that much because there are a lot of lawsuits going on currently. And there are these negotiations between AI companies and media companies because, of course, media organizations are not happy about their content being used to train these models. On the other hand, media organizations are at the core of producing reliable and trusted information. So AI companies actually need that content. So it's a bit of a struggle, how much to reveal, because you don't want to be these generative AI models, these large language models being trained on just crap that is out there and really not handing over that trusted and fact-based information. So there's a lot going on in the background in terms of negotiations. And the only thing that really helps is that the industry starts speaking with one voice and teams up to negotiate with the tech companies, because this is a relationship where both sides can only benefit from each other. And it really doesn't help when they work against each other. And I'm really glad that the EBU has been spearheading efforts to really initiate these conversations and really pushing for these conversations, because before it is often like, you talk to individual media organizations and then people say like, oh yeah, we need more collaboration, we need to stick together as an industry, but then quietly in private negotiations, or every company is in it for themselves, and that won't really help. So people wish to have collaboration but still negotiate for themselves, and that really is not beneficial to the industry. There needs to be some voice that really needs to be confident across the tech companies, and really making demands about reliable and trusted information being part of this whole information ecosystem.
The final thing I wanted to ask you about, Alexandra, and you've talked a little bit about this earlier on, is the report contains some really interesting practical use cases. We talked about this right at the very start about there's been a huge amount of change, has much be changed. So are there any of those particular use cases that you think are worth, I think all of them are really interesting, but any particular ones that stood out for you?
Well, I already mentioned the story generator. There is another one that the Bayerischer Rundfunk does, that is very close to home here, BR in Germany. They're working on personalization, and this is regional personalization. So you as a user, when you're interested in news from your particular region, you can just sort of draw a circle around your postcode, and then the AI will automatically select all kinds of news that happen in that particular region, and really update you with a small podcast that is personalized. So this is not personalization according to topics that public service media is reluctant to do, but it's about regions. And then of course, there are case studies about how companies are using AI to really help production, to build customized GPTs, to accelerate experimentation. There are lots of really interesting things. One that has also been striking to me is the effort by NPO, and that's the Netherlands, or one of the Netherlands public broadcasters. And what they are doing, they want to really include more voices in their coverage. And coming from journalism, this is something that I find extremely important. And they build up digital twins, so to speak. They build up a virtual focus group, an avatar focus group, so that the focus group can sort of run through the content and then sort of express, who is represented, who isn't represented, how can we enhance that. And that is very helpful for a newsroom, because real life focus groups are expensive. So if you use that to include more voices, I find that is a fascinating approach.
Yeah, it's a really interesting report. I would urge everyone to download it and have a read through it. It had lots and lots of great information. And I think hopefully we've summarized it, fairly well in our conversation here, Alexandra. So it's been a few years since we chatted, but I continue to ask people who are on the podcast the same final question. So I'm going to ask you again. What is it, if anything, that keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night? I already mentioned that, the creativity question. The creativity question, I think, is really vital. Will we have enough incentives to use our brains, our minds, to really push for better knowledge, more creativity, go deeper, produce quality journalism, really investigate? Or will we just want to offload work and use these shortcuts and don't really make an effort to understanding this world any longer? And that is really something that keeps me up at night, because I can see that with my own children who go to university. I also teach at university. I see students, and they're very self-reflective about this. Am I just being lazy? I'm getting lazy using AI, or will it really help me to be my best self and really, create something, advance something, and really make myself smarter? So that is really, to me, very challenging. And I would love to do more on that and more research on that.
Thanks to Alexandra for sharing her thoughts on what's a topic which will continue to prompt discussion for a long time to come, no doubt. Now, Alexandra has been on the podcast before, discussing a previous EBU report, and you can find links to that episode in the show notes. Also there, you can get the latest information on Avid's work on AI and the new story-centric capabilities between Media Central and WolfTech News, which includes AI capabilities. That's all for this episode. Thanks to Alexandra once more, thanks to our production team of Matt, Owen and Wim, and most of all, thanks to you for listening. My name is Craig Wilson. Join us next time for more of the people making the media.